KPBS On Demand is supported by UC San Diego's Art Power, presenting cellist Joshua Roman, performing from his album Immunity, alongside music by J.S. Bach and more, Sunday, June 22nd at UC San Diego's Epstein Family Amphitheater. Reserve your tickets at artpower.ucsd.edu.
This week on Roundtable, California on the verge. From the pandemic to the state's work towards racial equity, this might be a very different place in a couple of weeks. Does Governor Gavin Newsom keep his job, or does Deep Blue California turn red? This week, it's all about the recall. I'm Cristina Kim, and the KPBS Roundtable starts now.
KPBS On Demand is supported by UC San Diego's Art Power, presenting cellist Joshua Roman, performing from his album Immunity, alongside music by J.S. Bach and more, Sunday, June 22nd at UC San Diego's Epstein Family Amphitheater. Reserve your tickets at artpower.ucsd.edu.
Welcome to our discussion of the week's top stories. I'm Cristina Kim. Joining me on this remote edition of the KPBS Roundtable are KQED political reporter Marisa Lagos, LA Times columnist Jean Guerrero, and KPBS Metro reporter Andrew Bowen. Do you really want to go there? That's more or less the question California's current governor is posing to those who will decide if he still has a job in a couple of weeks.
The issue that brought me here today is on the ballot September 14th. The starkest contrast between myself and all of the folks on the other side that all supported Trump and support Trumpism is their support to end the mask mandate and to end the vaccine requirements, quote unquote, before their first cup of tea.
Governor Gavin Newsom made that pitch in Oakland this week. It was the latest in a rhetorical tightrope he's walking, with pressure to mobilize his supporters to turn in their ballots on one side and appearing engaged in the fight against an evolving pandemic and major wildfires on the other. This week, Roundtable is focused exclusively on the recall, now less than 2 weeks away. Our first guest is Marisa Lagos, political reporter and host of KQED's Political Breakdown in the Bay Area. Welcome back to Roundtable, Marisa.
Thanks for having me, Christina.
Okay, so as with all elections, we've seen a number of polls trying to gauge what people are thinking and what might happen on September 14th. A couple of weeks ago, a Survey USA poll showed that it wasn't looking too good for Governor Newsom. It was one of the only polls to show that he was set to actually lose the recall. But that changed this week, with an updated poll from Survey USA showing that 51% want to keep Newsom in office. So Marisa, how meaningful is polling at this stage in the campaign? And what should our listeners really do with this type of information that's coming out?
Yeah, I mean, I think as anybody will tell you who follows these things, polls are a snapshot in time. But I think that what we're seeing is really a trending over the last few weeks that coincides with what I think can objectively be described as sort of a Democratic freakout in early August, where midsummer polls were coming back and showing a lot of disengagement among the base for Newsom, right? The sense that maybe Republicans were more motivated to boot him out of office than Democrats were to keep him. And I think that we've seen an increase in the ground game by Democrats in recent weeks, a lot of outreach, a lot of effort to get their voters engaged. And it seems to be working. You don't have to believe the polls, although there are, in addition to that Survey USA poll, two others that have come out over the past week showing similar numbers. I actually think showing him in a stronger position than even that poll did. But we're also seeing who's turning in their ballots, and it seems to be trending toward Democrats. So what voters should do is vote their conscience, right? But I think that if you are one of those people who was, I'll sit it out, whether I'm a Republican or Democrat, you probably want to get involved, because it does seem like, coming down to the wire, this could be a close race and that it might be trending in the governor's direction.
So as we heard at the top, Governor Newsom is really positioning himself as the anti-Trump candidate. That was a strategy that really helped him win during his 2018 campaign. Do you think that's still resonating with voters? Is that still a strategy that makes sense?
It's an interesting question. I think that there was, again, a sense a month or two ago that maybe it wasn't working. But then what we saw was the entrance of Larry Elder into this race, this conservative talk show host who I think maybe, differ on Trump on some issues, but I think is sort of harnessing that same type of populist energy and quite frankly, saying some pretty outrageous things. So I think that, yes, I would say that it probably is working in that sense. I think a lot of Democrats are nervous when they look at this field that we could have a Governor Larry Elder. I think that Trump is sort of the easiest shorthand to explain to people on the left who may not be familiar with somebody like Elder as to the kind of politics that he is kind of putting forward. And so what I would say is that it's always better to be running for something, not just against something. So I think Democrats do need to do the work of telling their voters what Newsom is for, what he's done. But we also often see fear does motivate people. So I think it's a balancing act that they're trying to kind of figure out as the weeks change and the polls change and the dynamic changes.
So you mentioned Larry Elder, and we're going to be diving in more deeply into his candidacy in a little bit with LA Times columnist Jean Guerrero. But, as you said, it's a crowded field. He might be the person in the lead, but then you also have former San Diego Mayor Kevin Faulconer, who's taking a more middle-of-the-road approach with his strategy. Do you think this election is a litmus test for what GOP strategies might work in California in future elections?
You know what? I don't. And I think that's because this is such a crowded field. It's not a traditional election. I don't know that a Larry Elder would win a primary race. Like, we have top two primaries here, right? So he would be going up against this whole field in a regular election year. Maybe he would still pull it out and be, the top two against a Gavin Newsom type of Democrat. But I think that what we're seeing is really Republicans trying to seize a moment and an opportunity that doesn't come along very often because of those registration numbers I mentioned. And I think that, something similar that seems to be happening with someone like Larry Elder, or even the overall recall support, is that there is a base of people, just like there was for former President Trump, that are going to be for this and against Newsom no matter what. But I don't know that that number has a lot of opportunity to grow, or at least it hasn't seemed like it is in this state. And I think that if you are running in a more traditional campaign, it's fair to say really none of these candidates could win statewide, which is also what makes this interesting, right, Cristina, is that we could have a governor who's only in office for, say, 12 or 14 months and pretty rest assured they'd be fighting that entire time with the Democratic-led legislature.
Actually, and that brings up a huge point, right? And I think a big question on everyone's mind is, what could a Republican governor even do legislatively if they were to win this recall? You reported this week that even with Democrats controlling the legislature, a GOP governor could still change the state's course. So what are actually one or two things that they could do on day one if a Republican governor is elected during this recall?
I mean, I think the biggest thing top of mind immediate would be this question of COVID-19 response. Newsom's been very aggressive with statewide mandates around masking and some vaccines for certain, healthcare and other types of workforce. So every single candidate on the Republican side has said they would roll those back. And I think that would raise some interesting questions for jurisdictions who maybe have just been following the state's lead around masking in schools, for example. So that's one thing. More broadly, what I heard from folks who have worked in both Republican and Democratic administrations is that while none of these candidates would probably be able to institute their entire agenda, they could certainly gum up the works, even on stuff that's, in law already. Things like expanding healthcare to undocumented immigrants or abortion access. While those are statutes in California, they rely on the state government to sort of function, to pay out things, to make contract agreements, to make agreements with the federal government. And so there's an opportunity to gum up the works on that. And then the other thing I'll mention briefly, criminal justice broadly, Newsom put in an entire moratorium on executions that could be lifted day one. There's a huge parole case before the governor, Sirhan, who shot Robert Kennedy, just was approved by a panel for release. Things like that. I mean, we don't know what Newsom will do on that yet, right? He might overturn it anyway. But I do think that there are areas like that, judicial appointments and other appointments, where a new governor could affect a lot of change in a short period of time.
I've been speaking with Marisa Lagos, co-host of Political Breakdown on KQED, the Bay Area's public media station. Thank you so much, Marisa.
Thank you.
The leading GOP candidate, radio host Larry Elder, has been sending shockwaves across California's political field since he announced his bid for governor this past July. Calling himself the sage from South Central, Elder has made it clear that as governor, he would roll back vaccine and mask mandates and promote the Trumpian type of politics, including a hardline approach to immigration and an outright denial of systemic racism.
It is an absolute scandal. It is a defamation that America is systemically racist. This is the greatest country God ever created, and I'm not going to allow race hustlers, to demonize America, and to discourage black people from working hard and putting in the time, care, and attention to self-improvement, which is the route to the middle class.
That's a portion of a campaign video from Elder's website. In a blue state like California, how did Elder become the leading GOP candidate? And what does it mean for California's communities of color, in particular, the state's nearly 40% Latino population? Jean Guerrero, a columnist for the LA Times and former KPBS immigration reporter, has been following Elder's campaign closely and joins us again for more. Hey, Jean.
Hey, Cristina.
We've heard a lot about this election being a pandemic recall, but you argue that Larry Elder's popularity tells us a different story, one rooted in rising xenophobia. What do you mean by that? And really, what do you think is driving Elder's appeal?
Well, I mean, if you look at the voter information guide that comes with the ballot in the statement of reasons for the recall, the first two sentences are about basically Newsom being too nice to immigrants. And that is how this recall got started. You know, it started with nativists and anti-immigrant Republicans in California just very upset by Newsom's pro-Latino, pro-immigrant stance. They really, really didn't like that. And that was how the recall initially took off and found a lot of support on right-wing media. So I really believe that if he were elected governor, he, would work overtime to reverse all of the state's progress on immigrant rights and racial justice. And I believe it would set a nightmare precedent that would reverberate across the country, emboldening xenophobic governors in other states and potentially even paralyzing immigration reform efforts in Congress.
Something Elder is really trying to drive home is that as a black man, he can't be a white supremacist, even if he is denying structural racism and embracing that nativist rhetoric. On his website, he even has his own ad that says, "Do I look like a white supremacist?" What do you make of that? And how do we begin to understand really like that nuance between race and racism in this election?
Well, it's no accident that Larry Elder has, come to the forefront of California Republican politics under this whole umbrella of, do I look like a white nationalist to you? Because he is basically a Trojan horse for a white nationalist agenda. He mentored Trump's senior advisor and speechwriter, Stephen Miller, the architect of Trump's most draconian immigration policies, where he attacked refugees and asylum seekers and migrant children who had committed absolutely no crimes. As I write in my book, Hate Monger, he mentored him from the time that he was a teenager, and also mentored other Trump acolytes like Andrew Breitbart, the head of the right-wing blog Breitbart, and Alex Marlow, who's editor-in-chief there. So he is very much part of this whole alt-right, far-right movement. He is to the right of Donald Trump. And the idea that he is not a white supremacist or he's not advancing white supremacist ideas is just absurd. I mean, when you look at his writings, as I did in my columns, early on, he was citing an open white supremacist named Jared Taylor, who believes in a white majority country and says terrible, disparaging things about Black people and puts out false statistics that paint Black people as innately more violent than white people, stuff that's based in race-based pseudoscience from the eugenics era. And this is stuff that Larry Elder has been peddling, elevating white nationalism for years. And he gets away with it because he's a Black man. But people of color know that racism, internalized white supremacy, colorism, all of these issues are real issues in our communities. And unfortunately, Larry Elder is clearly either a victim to this and now a perpetrator of white supremacist ideology, or he understands that it sells. And I mean, he's built a career around this.
In the last few weeks, you've been writing a lot about the impact that this election will have on Black and Latino communities across the state. You also argue that Governor Newsom has been a pro-Latino governor. What do you really mean by that? And do you see this recall as a backlash against this stance?
It is absolutely a backlash against this stance. I interviewed a number of Latino leaders in the state and across the country who tell me that Gavin Newsom is one of the most pro-Latino governors, if not the most pro-Latino governor that this state has ever seen. He's appointed Latinos to key positions of power, including our first Latino senator, Alex Padilla. He prioritized high-risk Latino neighborhoods for COVID vaccines. He ensured that pandemic assistance went to our essential workers, farm workers who've kept our economy running throughout the pandemic. And importantly, he also made unprecedented investments in public education, which helped working class Latinos, free community college, and drove down the price of textbooks. So this isn't just about him helping undocumented people, which is massively important to Latinos because so many of us come from mixed status families, but just in general, the initiatives that he has backed and the money that he has invested has profoundly benefited our communities.
Well, going back to Larry Elder, which, as you've been talking about, has very nativist sentiments, he has a campaign ad that he delivers in Spanish that I want to play and just get your reaction.
Soy Larry Elder. El gobernador Gavin Newsom cerró las escuelas públicas para nuestros niños, mientras sus hijos fueron a clases en persona a una escuela privada. Además, cerró los restaurantes independientes mientras él cenaba en el restaurante más lujoso donde cobran $12,000 por el vino. Esta elección no se trata de demócratas o republicanos, se trata de Newsom.
So for those of you who don't know Spanish, Elder's referencing the closed schools while Governor Newsom's children are going to private schools in person, and then citing that, restaurants were closed. Meanwhile, the governor was going to the French Laundry, which is a very expensive restaurant. So, Jean, what do you think of this ad? Is this an effective ad for Republican or even Democratic Latinos?
Well, it is effective because it falsely paints Newsom as not caring about Latinos or not doing anything for the Latino community. Newsom has owned up to the fact that going to the French Laundry was a mistake. And has acknowledged that he shouldn't have done that. But the fact of the matter is that people are using that incident to paint Newsom as somebody who doesn't care about Latinos and hasn't done anything for working class Californians. And that couldn't be farther from the truth. Newsom's COVID restrictions, as difficult as they were for the Latino community, which experienced the brunt of the difficulty, in terms of death toll from COVID and economic toll, those restrictions saved countless lives. Like, I would rather have my abuelita still here alive the way that she is than not, because of, if Newsom hadn't put in place these protections for our community. So he took concrete steps to keep us safe. And I think that those should speak louder than, one mistake or act of hypocrisy that he made.
What is Governor Newsom doing to actually do outreach in Latino communities across California? Are you seeing his ground game get a little stronger? Is he trying to really, advertise the policies he's done for Latinos in that way?
Yeah, they've really picked up campaigning in Latino communities over the past week and a half. Spanish language advertisements, text message campaigns, phone calls on the ground, people knocking on doors to get the word out about what this recall is really about. And they also looped in Bernie Sanders, who really energized Latino voters in California. And so, Bernie Sanders is urging Latinos and Californians in general to vote no on this recall, because it really is just a Trojan horse for a Trump shill to take over the state.
Do you think this is a possible turning point in California politics?
I think that this is similar to what we saw in the 1990s, when there was enormous white fear related to demographic change in this state. And you saw bipartisan support across California for measures that targeted immigrants, things like Prop 187 that took social services away from the undocumented, including public school for their children, something which was later found unconstitutional, attacks on bilingual education and on affirmative action. And after that happened, Latinos mobilized, they naturalized their abuelos and abuelas and, their extended family. And they decided to be more politically active than ever before. And that is what turned California deep blue. And I believe that it is possible that even if this recall is successful and Larry Elder is appointed governor of the state, which would have terrible repercussions for Latinos and Black communities across the country, even so, I think that it would just be a huge wake-up call for Latinos in the state and across the country, and just awakening them to the fact that they have to they have to use their political power, their political voice in order to keep our community safe.
I've been speaking with Jean Guerrero, columnist for the LA Times. Thank you so much, Jean.
Thank you.
KPBS On Demand is supported by UC San Diego's Art Power, presenting cellist Joshua Roman, performing from his album Immunity, alongside music by J.S. Bach and more. Sunday, June 22nd at UC San Diego's Epstein Family Amphitheater. Reserve your tickets at artpower.ucsd.edu.
Instead of calling September 14th Election Day, maybe a better description might be to call it the due date. Voting is already happening with nearly 500,000 local ballots already turned in, according to the San Diego Registrar. Still, a major election like this in the middle of September just isn't normal. And as we get closer to the 14th, more and more people are starting to pay attention that there's even an election happening. And with that, some questions are popping up. We want to make sure you've got all the answers. So here to explain the voting process and the ballot itself is KPBS Metro reporter Andrew Bowen. Hey, Andrew.
Hi, Christina.
All right, so let's just get started. Let's take a few minutes for you to walk us through this ballot. There are two questions. The first one is pretty straightforward. What are voters being asked?
Yeah, it's a simple yes or no question. So should Governor Gavin Newsom be recalled or removed from office? And the outcome is a simple majority rule. So if a majority votes yes, he's out of office. And if a majority votes no, then he stays at least until the end of his first term, which would end in early 2023.
So simple enough, but then it does get a little more complicated. There are more than 40 names listed as people who are vying to replace Newsom if a majority votes yes for the recall. Are voters required to choose a name?
They're not. And voters, have the option to answer both questions, or they could just answer one and leave the other blank. But either way, your vote will be counted. The Democratic Party in California and Governor Newsom are encouraging people to vote no on the recall and then leave the second question blank. And the reason is they're applying a lesson that they think they've learned from the 2003 recall of Governor Gray Davis. At the time, Lieutenant Governor Cruz Bustamante was running as a replacement candidate on the second question, and the message from the Democratic Party was vote no on the recall and vote yes for Bustamante as the backup candidate. Ultimately, though, both Davis was recalled and Bustamante lost, and California got a Republican governor for the next 7 years in Arnold Schwarzenegger. So some analysts believed that the party's messaging, that yes on the recall or no on the recall, yes on the backup candidate, was confusing to voters, and it maybe encouraged some voters who were not big fans of Gray Davis to say, well, I can vote to recall him and replace him with another Democrat, which obviously didn't work out for them. This time around, Newsom and the Democratic Party have successfully prevented any high-profile Democrats from running in the election. So the question has essentially become, do you prefer Governor Newsom or one of these top-polling Republicans? And they think that will help them keep Newsom in office.
It's been a tough year for election workers. Donald Trump and his inner circle are still out there pushing the debunked narrative of Stop the Steal. A recent report by Cal Matters dives into the recall myth circulating, especially around social media. What are you seeing when it comes to disinformation around this election in California?
Yeah, this really is the age of misinformation and disinformation, and the latter meaning not just spreading things that aren't true, but intentionally spreading lies to confuse people to the point that they lose faith in democracy and government institutions. I haven't encountered any of these conspiracy theories in my own reporting or falsehoods, but they're certainly out there. And, we should acknowledge our election system is not flawless. There might be some people out there getting ballots mailed to them with other people's names on them, probably a previous resident of that address who hasn't updated their registration. It might be, somebody might not be getting a mail ballot because they've moved and they haven't updated their voter registration. There was also this case in Torrance in LA County that I think some people latched onto, where police discovered a man who had piles of stolen mail in his car, and along with some credit cards and driver's licenses, they also found about 300 unopened and unmarked mail ballots for this recall election. By the way, those voters are getting new ballots mailed to them, so they're still enfranchised. It doesn't appear to be a plot for massive voter fraud. It's just one person. And there are almost always pretty simple explanations for these isolated irregularities. Our elections are very secure. And as you say, there are very hardworking and honorable people trying to administer the election fairly. But when you're already convinced that there's a conspiracy out there and your mind has really been sort of infected with all of these bogus claims about massive voter fraud, you're looking for evidence to prove you're right, even if it isn't true.
Is there a way people can track their ballot, if they're concerned once they've actually turned it in?
There is. The Secretary of State has a portal online called Where's My Ballot? It's pretty easy to Google and find on the Secretary of State's website. And you just register and they'll send you an email when your ballot is received and another one when it's been processed and confirmed that it will be counted on Election Day. I got one just a few days after I sent mine in.
So this past Monday, August 30th, was the last day to register for mail-in voting. Does that mean people who needed to update addresses, have they missed the deadline? What do last-minute voters need to know in order to be able to vote?
It's not too late to register to vote. It's not too late to update your address or your name or your party affiliation if you want to do that. It's just a little bit more complicated. So you'll have to go to the Registrar of Voters office in Kearney Mesa and fill out a conditional voter registration card. It'll ask for your name, your address, birthday, and either your driver's license or state ID number or the last 4 digits of your social security number if you don't have one of those, a driver's license or a state ID. After you fill out that card, the elections worker will give you a provisional ballot, which is counted once the registrar verifies your eligibility. And this is just an example of a way in which California is really leading the nation in trying to make it as easy as possible to vote, even if you maybe procrastinated till the very last minute.
All right, everyone listening, even if you're a procrastinator, you can still get your vote on here in California. I've been speaking with KPBS Metro reporter Andrew Bowen. I know we'll be talking to you a lot more over the next coming weeks. Thank you so much.
You're welcome, Cristina.
That wraps up this week's edition of KPBS Roundtable. I'd like to thank my guests, Marisa Lagos from KQED, Jean Guerrero from the LA Times, and Andrew Bowen from KPBS News. If you missed any part of our show, you can listen anytime on the KPBS Roundtable podcast. I'm Cristina Kim. Thanks for listening, and join us next week on the Roundtable.
KPBS On Demand is supported by UC San Diego's Art Power, presenting cellist Joshua Roman, performing from his album Immunity, alongside music by J.S. Bach and more. Sunday, June 22nd at UC San Diego's Epstein Family Amphitheater. Reserve your tickets at artpower.ucsd.edu.